In the 41st millennium, hope is the first casualty of survival. Across a million worlds, humanity endures not because of faith in a better tomorrow, but because the alternative is extinction. Yet, on the shattered battlefields of Cadia, where the 13th Black Crusade raged and reality itself screamed, something impossible happened. Something fell from between dimensions, not a demon, not a warp-spawned horror, but a man who still believed that one person could make a difference. The skies above Cadia burned with colors that had no names. The Eye of Terror vomited its endless legions across a world that had stood sentinel for 10,000 years. Guardsmen died by the millions, their laser guns spitting defiance even as Chaos Space Marines carved through their ranks like scythes through wheat. This was the hour of Abaddon, the despoiler's greatest triumph, when Cadia would finally break. Then the sky tore open, not with the sickly purples and greens of the warp, but with a flash of blue-white brilliance that sent servitors screaming static and had tech priests frantically checking their augur arrays. Something punched through the membrane between realities with the force of a drop pod strike, trailing impossible energies that made psychers weep blood and demons shriek in confusion. Captain Steve Rogers hit the ground of Cadia doing 60 miles per hour, his vibranium shield absorbing an impact that should have liquefied every bone in his body. He rolled, came up in a combat stance, and immediately assessed his situation with the cold precision of a man who'd stormed Hydra facilities and faced down Thanos himself. What he saw made absolutely no sense. Towering warriors in Baroque power armor, 8 feet tall, covered in spikes and screaming faces, butchered human soldiers who fought with desperate courage. The humans wore uniforms he didn't recognize, carrying rifles that fired bolts of red light. The ground was carpeted with bodies. The air tasted like copper and ozone, and something worse, something that made his skin crawl with wrongness. A young soldier, couldn't be more than 20, stumbled backward from one of the armored giants, his laser gun's power pack smoking and empty. The monster raised a chainsaw sword that roared like a living thing. The kid didn't run. He fixed his bayonet with shaking hands and charged. Steve's shield left his hand before conscious thought caught up with instinct. The vibranium disc struck the Chaos Space Marine's helmet with a sound like a cathedral bell. The traitor Astartes staggered, actually staggered, and the shield ricocheted back to Steve's hand with the familiar weight of 1,000 battles. The young soldier gaped. The Space Marine turned, and Steve saw eyes that burned with unholy fire behind a cracked visor. "What are you?" the thing bellowed, its voice a bass roar that vibrated in Steve's chest. Steve set his feet, raised his shield, and gave the only answer he'd ever known. "I'm Captain America, and I don't care what you are. You're not killing any more of these men today." The Chaos Space Marine laughed, a sound like grinding metal, and raised its chain axe. Around them, the battle for Cadia's soul raged on. But in that moment, something changed. The young guardsman saw a man, just a man, no taller than himself, stand between him and death without fear. For the first time in his short, brutal life, he saw someone fight without the Emperor's benediction, without a commissar's gun at his back, without the promise of martyrdom. He saw someone fight because it was right. The 41st millennium had never seen anything like Captain America. It was about to learn what one good man could do, even in the darkness between the stars. If you crave stories of cosmic collisions where unshakable principles meet the brutal 41st millennium, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to impossible heroes in the dark millennium. The Chaos Space Marine's chain axe descended like the judgment of dark gods. Steve raised his shield, and when the screaming teeth met vibranium, the weapon shattered. Not dulled, not deflected, shattered. Fragments of corrupted ceramite and demon-forged metal scattered across the ruined ground, and for the first time in 10,000 years of service to the dark gods, the traitor Astartes knew genuine confusion. Steve didn't give him time to process it. He was already moving, shield edge striking the Space Marine's knee joint with surgical precision. The ceramite cracked. The giant stumbled. Steve followed with a shield bash to the chest that sent 800 pounds of corrupted transhuman warrior sprawling backward into the rubble. "Fall back," Steve shouted to the stunned guardsmen. "Regroup behind that rock-crete barrier. Move, soldiers." They moved, not because a commissar threatened them, not because the Emperor commanded it. They moved because a voice that carried absolute authority and zero cruelty told them to, and something in their war-broken souls recognized leadership that didn't demand their deaths as proof of loyalty. Steve covered their retreat, his shield deflecting bolter fire from the advancing Black Legion forces. Each shot that struck vibranium rang out like a bell, and each ring seemed to drive back the encroaching madness of the warp itself. 3 more Chaos Space Marines advanced, their armor writhing with demonic faces, their weapons weeping blood and worse things. The young guardsman Steve had saved. His name was Torrin Vask, though Steve didn't know that yet, couldn't look away. He'd seen Lord Castellan Creed himself rally troops under fire. He'd watched Commissar Yarrick execute cowards and inspire heroes with the same cold fury. He'd even glimpsed space marines of the Cadian pattern fighting with transhuman precision. This was different. The stranger moved like water around obstacles, like lightning when he struck. His blue uniform was torn and scorched, but still visible beneath the dust of Cadia's death throes. The circular shield in his hands defied every law of physics Torrin had been taught. It returned to the stranger's grip like a trained hawk, struck with impossible force, and somehow held against weapons that could punch through tank armor. But what terrified and thrilled Torrin in equal measure was the stranger's face. No grim determination, no religious fervor, no acceptance of death as the Emperor's gift. The man fought with something Torrin had no name for, something he'd never seen in 2 years of constant warfare. The stranger fought with hope. "Who is he?" gasped Sergeant Kane, the squad's highest-ranking survivor. "Some new kind of space marine, a sanctioned psyker?" "He's not one of ours," Torrin breathed. "Look at his armor. Look at his weapons. That's not Imperial issue. That's not anything issue." The Chaos Space Marines surrounded Steve now, moving with the coordinated precision of veterans who'd fought since the Horus Heresy. They expected him to fall. They'd killed 10,000 heroes on this world alone. One more anomaly would make no difference. Steve planted his feet, raised his shield, and smiled grimly. "I can do this all day." What followed wasn't a battle. It was an education. Steve Rogers had fought Chitauri armies, faced down Thanos' legions, and gone toe-to-toe with gods. These corrupted warriors were strong, fast, and utterly without mercy. But Steve had spent 70 years learning that strength without strategy was just violence waiting to fail. He used their size against them, ducking under power fists that pulverized rocky Crete. He exploited their aggression, letting them overextend before striking joint seals and helmet latches with shield-edge precision. He read their tactics in real time, adapting and countering with the tactical genius that had turned the tide against Hydra and the Red Skull. When the 4th Chaos Space Marine fell, its helmet caved in by a shield strike that would have crumpled a tank's turret. The remaining traitor Astartes actually hesitated. Behind their corrupted faceplates, minds that had forsaken sanity millennia ago tried to process what they'd witnessed. A baseline human, no power armor, no genetic enhancement beyond what their own kind had possessed before Ascension, fighting with a primitive shield and his bare hands, and winning. The warp around Cadia screamed in frustration. Chaos itself pressed against Steve Rogers' soul, seeking the crack, the weakness, the moral compromise that would let it flow in and corrupt. It found nothing. Not because Steve was pure, he'd made mistakes, compromised, failed people he loved, but because his core, his absolute bedrock certainty that people were worth protecting and tyrants were worth fighting, created something the warp had never encountered. A human soul it couldn't touch. "Withdraw," one of the Chaos Space Marines snarled into the Vox. "Report to the despoiler. There's something here, something wrong." They melted back into the smoke and ruin, leaving Steve breathing hard, shield raised, surrounded by 24 Cadian guardsmen who stared at him like he'd descended from the Golden Throne itself. Torrin Vask approached slowly, lasgun lowered, eyes wide. "What? What are you?" Steve lowered his shield and met the young soldier's gaze. "Just a soldier, son. Same as you." He looked around at the apocalyptic battlefield, the burning sky, the endless tide of horrors. "Though I'm starting to think I'm a long way from home. What is this place? What's happening here?" Sergeant Kane stepped forward, his weathered face carved from decades of warfare. "This is Cadia, stranger. The gate that holds back hell itself. And you just killed 4 of Abaddon, the despoiler's chosen warriors, with a piece of metal." He spat blood and smiled without humor. "I don't know what you are, but unless you're a demon in disguise, you just earned a place at our fire. Emperor knows we need every gun we can get." Steve looked at the exhausted, battered soldiers around him, looked at the burning sky and the endless war, looked at the young man whose life he'd saved, who stared at him with something dangerous and fragile growing in his eyes, something that looked like hope. "Then let's get to safety," Steve said. "You can tell me what's happening, and maybe—" He tightened his grip on his shield. "Maybe I can help." He had no idea how naive that sounded. Not yet. The makeshift command bunker smelled of recycled air, sweat, and something Steve couldn't identify, a cloying incense that made his eyes water. Sergeant Kane had led them through 3 kilometers of shattered cityscape, past scenes that made Steve's stomach turn. Crucified soldiers mounted on pikes, entire streets carpeted with shell casings and bodies, children no older than 12 loading artillery shells with mechanical efficiency, their eyes hollow. This wasn't war. This was industrial-scale slaughter dressed in religious ceremony. Now Steve sat on an ammunition crate in a rockcrete bunker 50 meters underground, surrounded by exhausted guardsmen who couldn't stop staring at him. His uniform was torn and scorched, but the shield rested against his knee. "Washak," reflecting the flickering lumens with an impossible sheen that transfixed the tech priest servitor in the corner. "Water?" Torrin offered, extending a canteen that looked like it had survived a tank battle. "Thanks." Steve took a long drink, grimacing at the metallic taste. "How long have you been fighting?" "Here, 4-month standard." "On Cadia?" Torrin's laugh was broken glass. "All my life, sir. I was born in the Kaiser fortresses. First time I held a lasgun, I was 8. First time I killed, I was 12. He said it matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. Steve's hand tightened on the canteen. "You were 12 years old. Orcs don't care how old you are, sir. Neither do the ruinous powers." Torrin paused. "You really don't know where you are, do you?" Before Steve could answer, the bunker's heavy door ground open with a hydraulic hiss. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Every guardsman in the room snapped to attention, spines rigid, eyes front. The terror rolling off them was palpable. The woman who entered wore black armor decorated with skulls and purity seals. A skull-faced servo-skull floated behind her, clicking and whirring. Her eyes were augmetic, glowing red in the dim light, and when she looked at Steve, he felt those eyes peeling back layers, searching for something. "Explain," she said, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone accustomed to instant obedience. "Why my Auspex registers a null field anomaly in this location. Explain why 4 Black Legion Astartes withdrew from a position they'd held for 17 hours. Explain why you, Sergeant Kane, failed to report contact with an unknown xenoform immediately upon returning to Imperial lines." Kane's face had gone gray. "Inquisitor Covenant, He's not a xenoform," Steve interrupted, standing smoothly. "And I'm right here. You want answers, you can ask me directly." The bunker went silent. One of the guardsmen made a sound like a strangled prayer. The servo skulls clicking intensified. Inquisitor Covenant's augmetic eyes focused on Steve with the intensity of targeting lasers. "You dare address me without—" she began. "Without what? Groveling?" Steve met her gaze without flinching. "I don't know what kind of authority you have here, but where I come from, respect is earned, not demanded." Torrenvask actually whimpered. Sergeant Kane looked like he was watching his own execution. The Inquisitor stared at Steve for 5 long heartbeats, her hand drifting toward a ornate pistol at her hip. Then, impossibly, she smiled. It was not a warm smile. "What are you?" Each word was precisely articulated, carrying the weight of someone who'd interrogated demons and found them wanting. "You bear no warp taint. My psyker died screaming when I ordered her to read you. Simply died, blood pouring from every orifice, babbling about a soul that shouldn't exist. You carry technology that matches no STC pattern in the Mechanicus archives. You defeated traitor Astartes in single combat using primitive hand-to-hand techniques." She stepped closer. "And you radiate something my equipment cannot classify, so I will ask once more. What are you—" Steve considered his answer carefully. He'd dealt with SHIELD interrogations, been debriefed by the World Security Council, even negotiated with the Black Panther in Wakanda. This woman was different. She expected compliance, expected fear, and she had the kind of absolute power that turned people into tools or corpses. "My name is Steve Rogers," he said quietly. "Captain, United States Army, serial number 3255738. I'm a soldier from Earth who was fighting to protect my world when some kind of energy anomaly, pulled me here. I don't know where here is. I don't know what year it is. But I know warriors trying to slaughter civilians when I see them, and I know which side I'm on." Covenant's augmetic eyes clicked and refocused. "Earth. Terra, you mean? And you claim to be from the ancient past, the dark age of technology? M2, perhaps M3. I don't know what that means." "Of course you don't." She circled him like a predator. The servo skull recorded everything, its mechanical lenses adjusting constantly. No warp signature, no chaos taint, no Xenos markers. You are either the most elaborate deception I've encountered in 40 years of service, or— she paused— or you are exactly what you claim to be, a relic, a ghost from before the fall. She stopped in front of him, close enough that Steve could see the targeting reticules flickering in her augmetic eyes. "That shield, let me see it." Steve hesitated, then handed it over. Covenant examined it with the intensity of a jeweler appraising a diamond, her gauntleted fingers tracing the perfect circle. No sacred oils, no purity seals, no machine spirit benedictions. Yet it absorbed bolt rounds that should have punched through plasteel. She looked up sharply. "What is it made of?" "Vibranium. It's a metal from—" "I don't recognize that material designation." She handed the shield back. "Which is impossible. The Mechanicus catalogs every element in the Imperium, unless—" her eyes narrowed— "unless this predates the catalogs themselves." Steve slung the shield across his back. "Look, I don't understand half of what you're saying, but those soldiers you mentioned, the ones attacking this city, they need to be stopped. If there's a command structure, a plan, I can help. That's what I do." Covenant studied him for a long moment. "You have no idea where you are, do you? No comprehension of the galaxy you've stumbled into." She gestured, and a hololith projector flickered to life, displaying a star chart so vast Steve's mind struggled to process it. "This is the Imperium of man. 1,000,000 worlds, trillions of souls, all that stands between humanity and extinction. For 10,000 years we have held the line against horrors you cannot imagine. Demons from the warp, Xenos who would devour us to the last child, traitors who worship dark gods." She zoomed in on a section of the map where reality itself seemed to bleed. "That is the Eye of Terror. A wound in space where the warp bleeds through. And this," she highlighted a world at the eye's edge, "is Cadia. We have held this gate for millennia, but Abaddon the Despoiler, the champion of Chaos Undivided, has launched his 13th Black Crusade. If Cadia falls, the Eye expands. If the Eye expands, the Imperium drowns in madness." Steve looked at the map, his tactical mind processing the strategic nightmare. 1,000,000 worlds, trillions of people. A war that had lasted 10,000 years. How do you fight something like that? "With faith," Covenant said simply. "With discipline. With the absolute certainty that humanity's survival requires sacrifices beyond measure. We are not kind, Captain Rogers. We are not merciful. We are necessary." She deactivated the hololith. "And you are an anomaly that could be a weapon or a catastrophe. The Ordo Xenos would have you vivisected. The Ordo Malleus would burn you for potential corruption, but I am Ordo Hereticus, and I deal in faith and heresy." She turned to Sergeant Kane. "This man killed traitor Astartes in hand-to-hand combat. He inspired your men without benediction or commissariat sanction. He carries technology that predates our archives." She looked back at Steve. "He is either the Emperor's gift or the most dangerous heretic I've ever encountered." Steve met her gaze steadily. "I'm neither. I'm just a soldier who believes people are worth protecting." "Everyone is worth protecting." Covenant's smile was razor-sharp. "Even traitors, even Xenos, even those who would see humanity enslaved. People who hurt innocents need to be stopped. That's not the same as saying everyone deserves to die." The Inquisitor laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "You truly are from another time. That naivete would get you killed within an hour in the 41st millennium." "But," she tapped her gauntlet, thinking, "Abaddon wants you. The warp recoils from you. And my instincts, honed across 4 decades of hunting heretics, tell me you might be exactly what this war needs. Or exactly what will doom us all." She extended her hand. "You will accompany me, Captain Rogers. You will be tested. You will be observed. And if you prove to be pure, you will serve the Emperor's will. If not—" The unspoken threat hung in the recycled air. Steve looked at her hand, looked at the terrified guardsmen, looked at young Torin Vask, who still watched him with that dangerous, fragile hope. He'd woken up in a new century once before. That time, S.H.I.E.L.D. had been there, and Coulson's earnest face, and eventually the Avengers. This time he was alone in a galaxy gone mad, where children learned to kill before they learned to read, and faith was enforced at gunpoint. But those were still soldiers bleeding out there. Still civilians dying. Still people worth protecting. Steve took her hand. "I'll help, but I don't serve blindly. I need to understand what's happening. All of it." Covenant's grip was iron. "Oh, you'll understand, Captain. By the Emperor, you'll understand exactly what kind of hell you've fallen into, and then we'll see if you still believe people are worth protecting." She released his hand and turned to leave. "Bring him. We march for the Kazergallen command post in 1 hour. Lord Castellan Creed will want to see the man who made the warp itself flinch." As she swept from the bunker, Steve looked at Torin. The young guardsman's face was pale but determined. "Sir," he whispered, "whatever happens, thank you for saving me, for treating us like we matter." Steve squeezed his shoulder. "You do matter, son. Don't ever forget that." He didn't see Torin's expression crumble into something between hope and heartbreak. Didn't see how those simple words, that basic recognition of humanity, cut deeper than any lasgun wound. In the 41st millennium, kindness was the rarest weapon of all, and Steve Rogers had just deployed it without even realizing. The march to Kasr Galen took 6 hours through a war zone that made the Battle of New York look like a border skirmish. Steve moved with Inquisitor Covenant's retinue, 20 guardsmen, 3 gun servitors that were more machine than human, and a cloaked figure Covenant introduced simply as my acolyte, who never spoke and whose eyes glowed faintly in the dark. The sky churned with colors that hurt to look at directly. Every few minutes, reality would flex, and Steve's stomach would drop as if he'd missed a step in the dark. The guardsmen prayed constantly, muttering litanies under their breath. The servitors didn't react at all, their human faces slack and dead behind cybernetic implants. They passed through sectors where the fighting had moved on, leaving only aftermath. Steve had seen war, had stormed beaches and fought in trenches. But this was different. This was war as theology, slaughter as sacrament. In one square, a commissar stood atop a pile of corpses, human corpses, guardsmen in the same uniforms as Torin, and shouted about the Emperor's judgment. The soldiers who'd died had retreated without orders. The commissar had executed them himself, bolt, pistol still smoking. The surviving guardsmen listened with numb acceptance. Steve's hands curled into fists. Covenant noticed. "You disapprove," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He murdered his own men. He maintained discipline. Without it, we fall to chaos. Fear of the enemy must be less than fear of failure. It's how we've survived 10,000 years. She looked at him sidelong. "Your world was different? We had military justice, courts martial. We didn't execute soldiers for retreating from impossible odds. Then your world was weak and likely dead." She said it without malice, simply stating fact. "Tell me, Captain Rogers, if one soldier's cowardice causes a gap in the line, and that gap allows demons through to slaughter 1,000,000 civilians, what is the moral calculus? 1 life or 1,000,000? Steve opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. Because in the cold arithmetic of survival, her logic was flawless. He'd made similar calls himself, sacrificed the few to save the many. But there was something about the casualness of it, the way these people treated human life as infinitely expendable, that made his skin crawl. "There's a difference," he said finally, "between hard choices and systematic cruelty." Covenant actually smiled at that. "Keep that thought, Captain. You'll be tested on it." They reached Kasr Galen as the sun, if it was a sun, behind all that unnatural storm, sank toward the horizon. The fortress was a mountain of rockcrete and plasteel, bristling with gun emplacements and crowned with enormous cannons that could level city blocks. But even here the signs of siege were evident. Scorch marks from demon fire, walls patched with prayers and welded scrap, soldiers with the 1,000-yard stare that Steve recognized from every war he'd ever fought. The command post was organized chaos. Hololithic displays showed troop movements across dozens of fronts. Vox operators screamed coordinates into crackling receivers. Staff officers argued over maps, while servitors processed data with mechanical efficiency. And at the center of it all stood a man who radiated command presence like a furnace radiated heat. Lord Castellan Ursarker E. Creed was a stocky bull of a man with a scarred face and eyes like gun barrels. He wore a greatcoat covered in medals and campaign badges, and when he turned to look at Steve, it was with the assessing gaze of a man who'd spent 50 years turning impossible battles into improbable victories. So you're the anomaly, Creed growled around an unlit cigar. Covenant, your message said he killed 4 Black Legion Astartes with a shield and his bare hands. That true or combat exaggeration? Confirmed by 17 witnesses and my own Auspex recordings, Covenant replied. Lord Castellan, he bears no warp taint, no chaos corruption. My psyker died attempting to read him. Her mind simply, rejected what she encountered. Creed's eyebrows rose fractionally. Died? Not went mad, died? Cerebral hemorrhage, instantaneous. As if his soul was incompatible with psychic contact. The Lord Castellan studied Steve for a long moment, then grunted. At ease, son. You've got the posture of a soldier, I'll give you that. Career military? Yes, sir. United States Army, though I'm guessing you've never heard of it. Terra herself, M2 or M3, Covenant thinks. Before the Unification Wars, before the Emperor revealed himself. Creed walked around Steve slowly. Ancient history, dead languages, and lost nations. But you stand like a man who's fought battles and won them. What's your rank, really? Not your story, your gut tells me you're officer material. Steve appreciated the directness. Captain, led a special operations unit during a global conflict. My world was fighting a totalitarian regime that wanted to conquer everything. We stopped them. Did you kill their leader? No, sir. He killed himself when he realized he'd lost. Creed barked a laugh. Tyrants always choose the coward's death when the bill comes due. Red Skull, was it? Covenant briefed me on what you told her. He moved to a hololithic display showing the broader strategic situation. Here's our bill, Captain Rogers. Abaddon the Despoiler commands 13 Black Sea crusades worth of traitor legions, demon engines, and cultist scum. He's broken worlds that stood for millennia. Right now, he's 20 kilometers from this fortress, with enough firepower to crack a continent. The display zoomed in, showing the Black Legion's positions. The sheer scale of it made Steve's tactical mind reel. Millions of troops, hundreds of armored formations, and those giant warriors, Astartes, Covenant had called them, serving as elite shock troops. We're holding, Creed continued, but barely. Every day we lose ground. Every night the warp presses closer and men go mad from what they see in their dreams. Commissar Yarrick is 3 sectors north, holding the line with spit and fury. Chapter Master Pask and his tank companies are fighting a mobile defense in the eastern approaches. And me? He smiled without humor. I'm trying to figure out how to win a battle that's already lost. Sir, with respect, there's no such thing as a battle that's already lost. Not while you still have soldiers willing to fight. Pretty words, you sound like a preacher. Creed's eyes narrowed. But Covenant tells me you made 4 Black Legion Astartes withdraw. That true? I killed 4 of them. Others retreated after that. You killed them. Traitor Astartes. In hand-to-hand combat. Creed looked at Steve's shield. With that, Steve unslung the shield and held it up. In the harsh lumen lighting, the vibranium gleamed with an otherworldly sheen. Vibranium, we called it, absorbs kinetic energy, nearly indestructible. I've used it against aliens, robots, and gods. Worked pretty well against your Chaos Marines, too. Creed took the shield, testing its weight. His expression shifted from skepticism to genuine surprise. Emperor's throne, this weighs nothing. And the balance. He handed it back carefully, almost reverently. Dark Age technology, something from the STCs we lost. It's from my world, about 70 years before I arrived here. 70 years. Creed exchanged a look with Covenant. He's been in stasis then, or cryosleep, matches the ancient patterns. He turned back to Steve. Captain Rogers, I don't care if you're a ghost from Terra's past or a Xenos trick I haven't identified yet. What I care about is whether you can help me save this world. Can you?" Steve looked at the hololithic display, looked at the exhausted staff officers and the servitors, and the soldiers standing watch with lasguns that looked like they'd fire until the power packs died, and then they'd use them as clubs. Looked at the impossible odds and the million small decisions that would determine whether humanity survived another day. He'd faced down Thanos with half the universe already dead. Had fought Hydra when they'd infiltrated everything he believed in. Had stood alone against the Winter Soldier and an entire carrier fleet. This was bigger, worse, more complex. But the fundamental question was the same. Would he stand and fight, or would he walk away? "I can try, sir, but I need to understand what I'm fighting. Really understand it. Not just tactics. The whole picture." Creed studied him for 3 long heartbeats, then nodded sharply. "Covenant, clear the room. Everyone out except command staff and our relic from the past." As soldiers filed out, he lit his cigar with a plasma lighter and exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "All right, Captain, you want the truth. The real, ugly, hopeless truth about the galaxy you've fallen into. Brace yourself. It's going to hurt." What followed was 2 hours of the most comprehensive strategic briefing Steve had ever received. Creed laid it out with brutal efficiency: the Imperium's theocratic tyranny, the Chaos God's endless hunger, the Xenos threats pressing from every direction, the 10,000-year decline from a golden age humanity could barely remember. The Imperium wasn't the good guys. They were simply the least terrible option in a galaxy where every alternative was extinction or damnation. They burned worlds to save them. They bred humans as ammunition. They built faith on mountains of corpses and called it necessary. And worst of all, they were probably right. Steve listened in growing horror as Creed explained the warp. A dimension of living nightmare where thought became reality and emotion fed gods of madness. Explained the Tyranids, an extragalactic swarm that devoured everything organic. Explained the Necrons who'd slept for millions of years and woke up wanting their galaxy back. Explained the Orcs, who fought because fighting was literally their biological purpose. "The Emperor," Creed said finally, pointing to a golden skull symbol omnipresent throughout the command post, "has sat on the golden throne for 10,000 years. Technically alive, technically dead. His psychic might shields Terra from the warp and guides ships through it. Without him, humanity dies. With him, we're trapped in a slow apocalypse, fighting endless wars we can never truly win." Steve sat down heavily on an ammunition crate. "You're telling me the entire human race is pinned between extinction-level threats on all sides, led by a corpse god they worship out of pure desperation, fighting an endless war they can't win. And this has been going on for 10,000 years? Now you're getting it." Creed's smile was grim. "Welcome to the 41st millennium, Captain, where hope is heresy and survival is the only victory we're allowed." Steve looked at his shield, looked at the tactical displays showing a million small tragedies playing out across the galaxy, looked at Covenant, who watched him with those augmetic eyes that missed nothing. "What did the Chaos Forces want with me?" he asked quietly. "You said Abaddon was interested. Why?" Covenant and Creed exchanged another look. Finally, the Inquisitor spoke. "Because you shouldn't exist, your soul is different. The warp tries to touch you and finds nothing to corrupt. No pride to feed Slaanesh. No rage to empower Khorne. No ambition for Tzeentch. No despair for Nurgle." She leaned forward. "Captain Rogers, the Chaos Gods have spent 10,000 years learning to corrupt every type of human soul. But you're something they've never encountered. A soul so absolutely certain of its moral foundation that it's essentially immune to their touch. That makes you," Creed added, "either the greatest weapon we've ever found or the most dangerous heretic in the Imperium. Because if soldiers see you resist corruption without faith in the Emperor, without the ecclesiarchy's benedictions, without constant prayer and ritual, they might start wondering if they need those things at all. The implications crashed over Steve like cold water. His mere existence was a threat to the theological foundation that kept the Imperium together. His morality, his simple belief that people had inherent worth, was heresy in a galaxy that measured human value in ammunition expenditure rates. "So what happens now?" Steve asked. Creed relit his cigar. Now Abaddon, the despoiler, is coming for you personally. My scouts report the Black Legion is redirecting forces toward this position. He wants you captured, studied, or killed. Probably in that order." He smiled like a shark. "Which means tomorrow, Captain Rogers, you're going to get a proper introduction to the 41st millennium. He's sending his finest warriors to take you." "Let them come," Steve said, surprising himself with the cold fury in his voice. "I've fought bullies before. Doesn't matter how big they are." Covenant's augmetic eyes gleamed. "There it is, the certainty that makes you anathema to chaos." She stood, her armor creaking. "Rest tonight, Captain. Tomorrow we'll see if ancient Terra's warriors are truly as mighty as the legends claim, or if you're just a man who'll die like all the rest." As she left, Steve sat alone with Creed, who studied him through cigar smoke. "Tell me true, son. You've seen what we are, what we do, what we've become. You still want to fight for us?" Steve met his gaze. "I don't fight for empires or governments or gods, sir. I fight for the people caught in the crossfire who deserve better. And from what I've seen, there are a lot of good people here who deserve better than what they've been given." Creed's expression softened just fractionally. "Dangerous thoughts, Captain. The kind that get men burned as heretics. But—" he looked at the tactical displays, at the impossible odds, at the dying world beyond the fortress walls. "Maybe that's exactly what Cadia needs right now, a man who still believes good people deserve better." He stood, grinding out his cigar. "Your quarters are 2 levels down. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, hell comes for you personally, and I want to see just how much of ancient Terra's strength survived the fall." As Steve was led away by silent guardsmen, he passed a window looking out over the shattered city. In the distance, Inyais, the Eye of Terror pulsed with sickly light, and somewhere in that madness, something ancient and terrible had taken notice of him. Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos, had spent 10,000 years breaking worlds and burning hope. Tomorrow he would learn what happened when hope refused to break. Steve woke to the sound of artillery fire and the sharp bark of a voxcaster announcing enemy contact on 3 fronts. He'd slept in his torn uniform, shield propped against the wall within arm's reach, body conditioned by decades of combat to respond instantly to threat. The small quarters they'd given him, barely larger than a prison cell, smelled of machine oil and that ever-present incense. He'd dreamed of Brooklyn, of Peggy, of a world where the worst monsters were human, and humans could be reasoned with or stopped. He woke to a galaxy where humanity had become the monsters, just to survive, and the real monsters were literally incomprehensible. The door opened without preamble. Torin Vask stood there, looking like he hadn't slept at all. "Sir, Inquisitor Covenant requests your presence. The Black Legion is moving. And—" he swallowed hard. "They're calling for you, by name." Steve grabbed his shield. "By name? How would they know my name?" "I don't know, sir, but the voxcasters intercepted their channel. They're broadcasting it across all frequencies." Torin's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're calling you the shield-bearer, the anathema, the one who cannot fall." They made their way through corridors packed with soldiers preparing for battle. Steve noticed something different in how they looked at him now. The story had spread. One man with a metal disc had killed 4 Chaos Space Marines in a galaxy where individual heroism was celebrated only in death, where victory meant acceptable losses and survival was measured in body counts. Steve represented something dangerous, proof that one person could matter. The command center was chaos organized into barely controlled movement. Creed stood at the hololithic display, directing forces with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a butcher. Covenant waited beside him, her servo skull clicking and recording everything. "Captain Rogers," Creed said without looking up. "Good. You're about to get famous. Play the Vox message." A tech priest manipulated controls, and the speakers crackled to life. The voice that emerged was deep, resonant, and carried the weight of millennia of conquest. It spoke Gothic, the Imperium's language, but Steve found he could understand it, some lingering effect of whatever had brought him here. "Soldiers of the false emperor, your shield-bearer is a lie, a relic from a dead age that believed in mercy and weakness. Send him to me. Let him face the despoilers chosen, and I will show you how ancient heroes die, or hide him like the cowards you are, and I will burn this fortress to ash finding him." The message repeated, Abaddon himself taunting them, demanding Steve specifically. "He's scared," Steve said quietly. Every head in the command center turned to him. Creed's eyebrows rose. "The War Master of Chaos, Breaker of Worlds, leader of 13 Black Crusades, is scared of you? Why else would he be trying to draw me out? If I was just another enemy, he'd roll over this position like he has 100 others. But I'm something he doesn't understand, something that resisted corruption without trying. That makes me unpredictable." Steve studied the tactical display. "He wants to eliminate me before I become a symbol. Before your soldiers start wondering if his power isn't as absolute as they've been taught." Covenant's augmetic eyes focused sharply. "Tactically sound analysis. The ruinous powers thrive on despair. You represent something they cannot corrupt or comprehend. If word spreads that a baseline human resisted their touch..." She paused. "Mass morale shifts. Soldiers begin questioning whether damnation is inevitable. Faith in the Emperor's protection increases, while fear of chaos decreases." "Which could win us this war," Creed said slowly. "Or get every man in this fortress killed if you're not what you appear to be." He turned to Steve. "You don't have to do this. I can refuse his challenge. We fight on our terms. And watch him bombard this fortress into rubble while broadcasting that you hid me." Steve shook his head. "No, sir. I've fought bullies before. You don't beat them by hiding. You stand up and show them they're not as strong as they think. He'll send Astartes, plural, probably a whole Terminator squad, maybe demon engines. He wants you dead or captured, and he'll commit resources we can't match." Creed's expression was grim. "You're talking about facing the finest warriors Chaos has, warriors who've fought for 10,000 years, who've slaughtered worlds. And you want to do it with a shield and your bare hands? I've fought worse." Steve wasn't boasting. He'd gone hand-to-hand with Thanos, faced down Ultron's army, fought the Winter Soldier in close quarters. These Chaos Space Marines were bigger, stronger, and tougher than human. But so were most things he'd fought. "But I'll need intel, everything you know about Abaddon's chosen warriors. Their tactics, their weapons, their weaknesses." "They don't have weaknesses," a new voice growled from the doorway. "They only have targets." The Space Marine who entered had to duck through the reinforced doorframe. He wore midnight blue armor decorated with white skulls and carried himself with the absolute confidence of a transhuman warrior who'd survived centuries of war. When he looked at Steve, it was with open curiosity mixed with something that might have been respect. "Brother Captain Davian Cross, Ultramarines 4th Company," he introduced himself. His voice was a bass rumble that vibrated in Steve's chest. I fought at Macragge when the Tyranids came. I've stood on a dozen worlds against Chaos incursions, and I've never seen a baseline human kill 4 Black Legion Astartes in hand-to-hand combat. He approached Steve, towering over him by 2 feet. Show me this shield. Steve handed it over. The Space Marine examined it with the same intense focus Covenant had shown, but with the added perspective of a warrior who understood weapons intimately. He tested its weight, its balance, even struck it experimentally against his armored gauntlet. The ring of vibranium against ceramite was like a bell tolling. Impossible alloy, Cross murmured. No flex, no deformation, perfect weight distribution. It shouldn't exist. He handed it back. Lord Creed, this man's weapon predates the Imperium. Probably predates the Dark Age of technology. If the Mechanicus knew about this... He trailed off meaningfully. They don't, Covenant said sharply. And they won't, not until I determine if Captain Rogers is asset or threat. Brother Captain, you fought Black Legion Terminators. What will Abaddon send? Cross turned to the tactical display. If he's making a show of it, he'll send the Bringers of Despair, Abaddon's personal Terminator bodyguard, 12 warriors who've stood at his side since the Horus Heresy itself, each one a veteran of 10,000 years of warfare, each one blessed by all 4 Chaos gods. He looked at Steve. They cannot be killed by conventional weapons. They shrug off Lascanan fire. Their power fists crush tanks, and their mere presence drives normal humans mad with terror. Then I guess it's good I'm not normal, Steve said dryly. Cross actually smiled, a brief flash of humanity in that transhuman face. Indeed, Lord Creed, I request permission to accompany Captain Rogers to this meeting. Denied, Creed said immediately. If this is a trap, and it probably is, I need you holding the northern wall. Captain Rogers goes alone. That's what Abaddon demanded, and we're going to give it to him. But, he turned to Steve, you're not going blind. Covenant, deploy your acolyte as Overwatch. Sniper position with Vox relay. If things go south, I want real-time intelligence. The cloaked figure who'd accompanied them yesterday stepped forward and bowed silently. Up close, Steve could see the specialized augmetics, one eye replaced with a targeting scope, hands modified to eliminate tremor. A living weapon shaped by the Inquisition. The meeting point is here, Creed indicated a section of the hololithic display. Old Basilica, half collapsed, 3 kilometers into contested territory. Neutral ground, theoretically. You walk in, face whatever he sends, walk out. Or die trying. I've had worse odds, Steve said, and he meant it. Sokovia falling from the sky while Ultron's drones swarmed. That had been worse. This was just a fight. One more thing, Covenant said. When you face them, when you stand before the Bringers of Despair, remember that they're not just warriors. They're vectors of corruption. The warp flows through them. They'll try to break your will, make you doubt, offer you power. They'll show you visions of everyone you failed to save. They'll promise you the strength to protect everyone, if only you kneel. Steve met her augmetic gaze steadily. Let them try. I've faced down gods before. I've stood alone against armies, and I've never, not once, been tempted by power that requires I become something less than human to wield it. He slung his shield across his back. When do we leave? 1 hour, Creed said. Use it to prepare. Pray to whatever you believe in. Make peace with death. He extended his hand. It's been an honor, Captain Rogers. Whether you're a ghost from Terra's past or something else entirely, you've reminded me that courage doesn't require genetic enhancement or ancient rituals. Sometimes it's just one man with a shield, refusing to run. Steve shook his hand firmly. The honor's mine, sir, and I'm not planning on dying today. These Bringers of Despair are about to learn that 10,000 years of experience doesn't mean much when you've never fought someone who won't stay down. As he left to prepare, Torrin Vask caught up with him in the corridor. The young guardsman held a battered prayer book and a strip of red cloth. "Sir, I know you don't follow the Imperial cult, but would you take these?" The prayer book was my father's. He died at Tirok Fields holding the line. The cloth is Acadian custom. Warriors wear it for luck. Steve took both carefully. "Thank you, Torrin, but I'm coming back. I'm not leaving you or anyone else to fight this war alone." Torrin's eyes were bright with something between hope and fear. "Sir, what you said yesterday about us mattering, did you mean it?" "Every word. Then fight for that. Not for the Emperor, not for the Imperium. For the idea that we, baseline humans, regular soldiers, we matter enough to protect. Because if you die proving that," he swallowed hard, "then maybe your death will mean something. Maybe it'll change things." Steve gripped his shoulder. "I'm not dying today, son. I'm going to show these Chaos Marines that good people are always worth fighting for. And then I'm coming back and we're going to figure out how to win this war the right way, not the Imperium's way, the right way." He didn't see the effect those words had as he walked away. Didn't see Torrin Vask standing in that corridor, tears streaming down his face, gripping the lasgun he'd carried since he was 12 years old, and wondering for the first time in his life if there was something worth fighting for beyond orders and fear and faith. Steve Rogers had been in the 41st millennium for less than 24 hours. He'd already planted seeds of rebellion in hearts that had never known anything but obedience. The Imperium was right to fear him, just not for the reasons they thought. The walk to the ruined basilica took Steve through 3 kilometers of what had once been a residential district. Now it was a graveyard. Buildings reduced to skeletal frameworks, streets carpeted with rubble and shell casings, and everywhere, the bodies. Civilians mixed with soldiers, children frozen in their final moments of terror, families who'd died huddled together, seeking protection that never came. Steve had seen war's aftermath before. He'd walked through liberated concentration camps, seen entire villages erased by Hydra's weapons. But this was different in scale and in philosophy. These people hadn't just died in war. They'd been sacrificed to it, ground up in the machinery of survival, and left where they fell because retrieving bodies was an inefficient use of resources. Covenant's acolyte shadowed him from rooftop positions, never visible but always present. Steve could feel the sniper's scope tracking him, the Vox relay recording his vitals and transmitting them back to command. He was bait, and everyone knew it. The question was what would take the bait, and whether Steve could survive long enough to matter. The basilica rose from the ruins like a broken tooth. It had been a cathedral once, dedicated to the god emperor of mankind. Now half the roof had collapsed and the statuary lay shattered across the prayer ground. But the main structure still stood, its walls covered in prayers and purity seals that fluttered in the chemical wind. Steve stepped through the main entrance, shield up, senses alert. The interior was dim, lit only by holes in the ceiling where shells had punched through. Dust motes floated in the beams of sickly light. His footsteps echoed on broken tile. "I'm here," he called out, his voice carrying through the ruined space. "Let's get this over with." For a long moment, nothing. Then the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Frost formed on the broken walls, and the wrongness Steve had felt since arriving in this galaxy intensified until his skin crawled and his instincts screamed to run. They materialized from nothing, not walked in, not appeared. Materialized as if reality itself had been paper and they'd simply torn through it. 12 figures in Terminator armor that made Brother Captain Cross look under-equipped. Each stood nearly 10 feet tall, massive beyond reason, their armor baroque and twisted with faces that screamed silently and chains that wrapped around impossible angles. They carried weapons that hummed with malevolent energy, power fists that crackled with unholy lightning, combi bolters that wept oil and worse things, a massive hammer that seemed to bend light around itself. The bringers of despair, Abaddon's personal guard, warriors who'd fought in the Horus heresy itself, who'd stood against the Emperor and survived. The central figure stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice was layered, multiple tones speaking in harmony and discord simultaneously. Shield-bearer, the War Master sends his regards and his curiosity. What manner of thing are you that the warp itself recoils from your presence? Steve studied them, tactical mind processing what he saw. They were huge, armored like tanks, armed with weapons that could level buildings. Conventional wisdom said run. But conventional wisdom had never stopped him before. "I'm Captain Steve Rogers," he said calmly, "and I'm the man who's going to tell Abaddon that Earth's heroes don't kneel to tyrants. Not in my time, not in yours." Laughter. All 12 of them laughed, and the sound was wrong. It echoed in dimensions Steve couldn't see, made his teeth ache and his vision blur. The walls of the basilica cracked further, and somewhere in the distance, he heard screaming. "Earth," the leader said. "Terra, the cradle world. You claim kinship with the throne world itself? How quaint." The War Master wondered if you were Xenos, or demon, or some trick of the deceiver. "But you're just human. A relic. A ghost." He raised his power fist, energy crackling around ceramite fingers that could crush a man's skull like an egg. "The age of heroes died 10,000 years ago, Shield-bearer. We killed it, we burned it, we ended it. And now we'll end you." They moved. For all their size, they were fast. Terminator armor shouldn't allow for speed. It was designed for inexorable advance, unstoppable momentum. But these warriors had 10 millennia of experience, and the blessings of 4 chaos gods flowing through their veins. They came at Steve from multiple angles, a coordinated assault that would have overwhelmed any normal human in seconds. Steve wasn't normal. He'd fought the Chitauri in New York, learned to read alien attack patterns in real time. He'd gone hand-to-hand with Ultron's drones, adapted to synthetic combat logic. He'd faced Thanos' children, warriors who'd conquered worlds. These bringers of despair were dangerous, but they fought like they expected to win through intimidation and overwhelming force. Steve fought like a man who'd spent 70 years proving that size didn't matter half as much as skill. The first power fist came down like a meteor. Steve rolled left, feeling the shockwave as ceramite pulverized the floor where he'd stood. He came up, throwing, and his shield struck a Terminator's helmet with that perfect bell-tone ring. The warrior staggered, actually staggered, and Steve was already moving, using the momentary confusion to position himself near a fallen pillar. "He bleeds," one of them said, surprised. "The shield-bearer bleeds like any man." Steve wiped blood from a cut on his cheek where debris had struck him. "Yeah, I bleed, I hurt, I get tired, but I don't quit." "That's the difference between us." They came again, and this time they were angry. Coordinated tactics gave way to aggressive assault. A combi bolter opened up, explosive rounds chewing through the basilica's interior. Steve used the pillar as cover, counted the rhythm of fire, and moved the instant there was a pause for reload. His shield deflected bolter rounds that should have punched through him, the vibranium absorbing kinetic energy that would have killed him instantly. He couldn't hurt them. Not really. Their armor was too thick, too blessed by unholy powers. But he could frustrate them, delay them, make them make mistakes. And mistakes were what Steve Rogers lived for. A Terminator charged, power fist raised. Steve didn't try to block. That would just get him killed. Instead, he dodged at the last second. And the power fist struck another Terminator who'd been moving to flank. Ceramite cracked. The struck warrior roared in rage and shoved his brother backward. For just a moment, their coordination broke. Steve exploited it ruthlessly. He threw his shield at a cluster of three, forcing them to scatter, grabbed a chunk of fallen masonry and hurled it at another's helmet, not to harm but to blind, rolled under a sweep of that massive hammer and came up behind the wielder, striking the knee joint with every ounce of super soldier strength he possessed. The Terminator's leg buckled, just an inch, just for a second, but it was enough. The warrior overbalanced, and Steve was already gone, shield returning to his hand as he put distance between himself and the temporarily disabled enemy. "Enough!" the leader snarled. He raised one hand, and reality flexed. The wrongness intensified until Steve's vision swam. The walls of the basilica seemed to breathe. Shadows moved independently of their sources, and Steve heard whispers, thousands of voices offering him power, promising him strength, showing him visions of everyone he'd failed to save. Bucky falling from the train, Peggy dying of old age while he stayed young, the Avengers torn apart by the Sokovia Accords, Tony bleeding out in his arms, Natasha sacrificing herself on Vormir, the snap and half the universe turning to dust. "You failed them all," the leader's voice was inside Steve's head now. "Every person you tried to protect, every ideal you fought for, all dust, all failure. But we can give you power, shield bearer. Power to protect everyone. Power to never lose again. Simply kneel." Steve's hands shook. The visions were so real, so visceral. He could feel Bucky's hand slipping from his grasp, could hear Peggy's final confused words, could see the defeat in Tony's eyes during their final fight. He'd failed them, failed so many people. But then another memory surfaced, not of failure, of choice. "I can do this all day." He'd said that to bullies in Brooklyn, to Red Skull, to Thanos himself, not because he was stronger, not because he couldn't lose, but because some things were worth standing up for, worth fighting for, even when you knew you'd lose. The people of this galaxy, Torrin Vask and Sergeant Kane and millions like them, they deserved someone who'd stand up for them. Not because a god commanded it, not because an emperor demanded it, but because they were people and people mattered. Steve's hands stopped shaking. The visions faded. When he looked up at the bringers of despair, his eyes were clear and hard as winter ice. "No," he said simply. "I've lost people. I've failed. I've made mistakes I can never fix. But I don't kneel to bullies. I don't serve tyrants. And I sure as hell don't make deals with things that murder children and call it necessary." He raised his shield. "So let's try this again. But this time understand something. I'm not trying to kill you. I'm trying to show you that your power doesn't mean a damn thing when someone refuses to be afraid of it." The leader tilted his head, and for the first time, something like uncertainty flickered across his face. The warp had thrown everything at this man, visions of his worst failures, promises of ultimate power, the crushing weight of cosmic horror, and he'd simply said no. Not through faith. Not through ritual or prayer or the Emperor's protection, through nothing but his own absolute certainty that some principles were worth dying for. "Impossible," the leader breathed. "No human soul is that certain." "Then you've never met the right kind of human," Steve said, and he smiled. Actually smiled, standing in a ruined cathedral, surrounded by 12 of Chaos's finest warriors, bleeding and exhausted, but unbroken. "Let me show you what Earth's heroes are really made of," he charged. A baseline human in a torn uniform carrying nothing but a shield, charging 12 10,000-year-old Chaos Terminators who'd broken worlds and slaughtered billions. It should have been suicide, should have been the desperate gambit of a man with no options. Instead, it was a statement. A declaration that some people couldn't be broken by horror or temptation or inevitable defeat. That courage wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to surrender your principles, even when surrender was the only logical option. Steve Rogers wasn't trying to win this fight. He was trying to prove that even in the 41st millennium, even in a galaxy gone mad with cruelty and despair, one good man standing for the right reasons could make the darkness hesitate. And in that ruined basilica, surrounded by the avatars of chaos itself, Captain America made them hesitate. The shield rang out like a bell. Once, twice, 3 times, each strike a declaration that heroes weren't dead. They'd just been forgotten. And now, impossibly, one had come back to remind the galaxy what they'd lost. The fight lasted 7 minutes. In those 7 minutes, Steve Rogers redefined what the Bringers of Despair understood about human capability. He couldn't win. That was clear from the first exchange. Terminator armor was designed to withstand anti-tank weapons, and the Chaos Blessings made these warriors even more durable. Every strike Steve landed, and he landed many, would have killed a normal human instantly. Against the Bringers, they barely scratched paint. But Steve wasn't trying to kill them. He was trying to survive, to frustrate, to demonstrate that their vaunted power meant nothing against someone who refused to break. He used the environment ruthlessly. Collapsed pillars became obstacles that forced the Terminators to maneuver carefully. Debris became projectiles that, while ineffective as weapons, disrupted sight lines and coordination. The shield became a tool of infinite utility, blocking, striking, throwing, creating space when the Terminators tried to surround him, and most importantly, Steve used their expectations against them. They expected him to fight like a warrior, aggressive, seeking decisive engagement. Instead, he fought like a tactician. He created chaos in their ranks, forced them to adapt to his rhythm instead of imposing theirs, made every second they spent trying to kill him a second they weren't coordinating effectively. A power fist grazed his shoulder, and Steve felt ribs crack even through the glancing blow. He rolled with the impact, came up throwing his shield at the leader's faceplate, used the moment of distraction to put a collapsed archway between himself and 3 pursuing Terminators. "Stand still and die with honor," one of them roared. "Honor," Steve called back, breathing hard, tasting blood. "You serve gods who demand child sacrifice and call it worship. Don't lecture me about honor." Another charge, another desperate dodge. Steve's super soldier healing was already working on his ribs, but the damage was accumulating faster than he could recover. His uniform was shredded, skin burned where he'd come too close to a power weapon's energy field, and his left leg was developing a limp from where debris had struck his knee. But he was still fighting, still moving, still refusing to quit. The leader finally stopped, raising a fist. His brothers halted immediately, disciplined despite their rage. The Terminator champion studied Steve for a long moment. This bleeding, exhausted human who should have died in the first 30 seconds, but was somehow still standing 7 minutes later. "Enough," the leader said. "The War Master sent us to test you, Shield Bearer, to determine if you were threat or curiosity, to see if you could be broken." He laughed, that wrong, multi-toned sound. "We cannot break you. The warp itself cannot touch you. You are singular. A soul so absolutely certain that it creates a void where corruption should take root." Steve straightened painfully, shield raised despite the agony in his shoulder. "So what now? You report back to Abaddon that you couldn't kill one man?" "Oh, we could kill you." The leader's tone was matter-of-fact. "Eventually, given time, we would wear you down and you would fall. But the cost," he gestured at his warriors. Several bore dents and cracks in their armor. One's helmet was visibly damaged. Another moved with a slight limp where Steve had exploited a joint weakness. The cost would be measured in time and resources the War Master cannot spare while Cadia still stands. He stepped closer and Steve tensed, ready for another attack. But the Terminator simply studied him with eyes that glowed with unholy fire behind his helmet lenses. You are a weapon, shield bearer, but not for the Imperium, not for chaos. You are a weapon against certainty itself. Every person who sees you resist corruption without the Emperor's benediction will question their faith. Every soldier who witnesses you fight without augmentation or genetic superiority will wonder why they need space marines. You are a virus in the Imperium's theology, and the War Master. He paused. The War Master wants to see how that virus spreads before he crushes it. So you're letting me go? We are leaving. There is a difference. The leader turned to depart, his brothers forming up around him. Know this, Captain Rogers of Ancient Terra. You have been weighed by Abaddon the Despoiler and found interesting. He will be watching, and when the time comes, when your presence has infected enough Imperial hearts with doubt and hope, he will collect you, not as a corpse, as a prize. They began to fade, reality tearing open to receive them. But the leader paused at the threshold between dimensions. One final gift, shield-bearer, a warning from one warrior to another. Lord Castellan Creed knows what you represent. So does Inquisitor Covenant. They will use you as a weapon against chaos, yes. But the moment you threaten the Imperium's stability more than you help its survival, they will kill you without hesitation. The Imperium does not tolerate hope that exists outside its control. Then they were gone, leaving Steve alone in the ruined basilica with nothing but the sound of distant artillery and his own ragged breathing. He stood there for 30 seconds, making sure they were truly gone. Then his legs gave out, and he sat down hard on a pile of rubble, shield clattering beside him. His hands shook, his ribs screamed. Blood dripped from a dozen cuts and abrasions, but he was alive, more than alive. He'd faced the worst chaos had to offer and walked away. Sir, Covenant's acolyte materialized from the shadows, moving with inhuman grace. Up close, Steve could see more of the modifications, the silent step augmentation in the legs, the Vox bead implanted directly into the skull, the utter absence of anything resembling humanity in those modified eyes. Can you walk? Give me a minute. Steve's voice was rough. He took Torrens' prayer book from his pocket, miraculously undamaged, and the red Cadian cloth. They'd survived the fight with him. Small blessings. Did you record everything? The acolyte nodded once, no words, just the gesture. Good. Creed needs to see this, needs to understand what we're dealing with. Steve forced himself to his feet, gritting his teeth against the pain. They're not afraid of me. They're interested. That's worse. That means Abaddon has a plan, and I'm part of it somehow. The walk back took twice as long as the walk out. Steve's injuries slowed him, and twice he had to stop to let his enhanced healing catch up with the damage. The acolyte stayed close, sniper rifle ready, scanning for threats that never materialized. The Black Legion had withdrawn from this sector entirely, leaving an eerie quiet in their wake. They reached Imperial lines as the sun, if it could be called that, reached its zenith. The guardsmen on the perimeter gaped when they saw Steve approaching. Word of his survival spread through the trenches like wildfire. The shield-bearer walked into a meeting with 12 Chaos Terminators and walked back out. By the time Steve reached the command post, a crowd had gathered. Soldiers who should have been resting, servitors that had paused in their duties, even a few tech priests whose augmetic eyes clicked and refocused as they tried to scan him. They stared in silence, and Steve recognized the look in their eyes. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy's cruelty wasn't absolute, that one person could still make a difference. Creed met him at the command post entrance, Brother Captain Cross beside him. The Space Marine's face was unreadable, but Creed's expression mixed relief with grim calculation. "You survived," Creed said simply. Against all odds and sense, you survived. Covenant's acolyte transmitted the engagement footage. We watched you fight 12 of Abaddon's personal guard for 7 minutes and lived to tell about it. He shook his head slowly. Captain Rogers, I've been fighting this war for 50 years. I've seen heroes die by the thousands, saints martyred for the Emperor, space marines fall defending lost positions. But I have never seen a baseline human do what you just did. I got lucky, Steve said, because it was partly true. They were testing me. If they'd been serious about killing me, I'd be dead. They were serious, Cross rumbled. I know the bringers of despair. I've faced them. They don't play with their prey. They annihilate it. The Space Marine's voice carried grudging respect. You forced them to fight on your terms, made them adapt to you instead of overwhelming you. That's unprecedented. Covenant emerged from the command post, her servo skull clicking excitedly. Captain Rogers, we need to debrief immediately what Abaddon's champions said at the end about the War Master watching you, collecting you, that has strategic implications we must analyze. Later, Creed said sharply. The man just survived combat with 12 Chaos Terminators. Give him an hour to breathe, Inquisitor. We don't have an hour. Abaddon is moving forces. The Black Legion is regrouping for a major assault, and intelligence suggests it's targeted at Lord Castellan. A Vox operator ran up, breathless. Priority transmission from Lord Commissar Yarrick. The Northern Front is collapsing. Demon engines have broken through. He's requesting immediate reinforcement, or the entire sector will fall within 6 hours. Creed's jaw tightened. Cross straightened, already calculating response times. Covenant's augmetic eyes flickered as she processed tactical data. Steve watched them, these defenders of a dying world, trying to plug holes in a failing dam with their bare hands. Saw the exhaustion in Creed's eyes, the grim acceptance in Cross's posture, the cold calculation in Covenant's augmetics that weighed lives against strategic necessity. How many troops can you spare? Steve asked. Maybe 2 regiments, Creed said. Not enough. Yarrick needs 5 to hold that position, and we don't have 5. Every sector is at breaking point. If I pull troops from the eastern wall to reinforce the north, the east collapses. If I hold the east and ignore the north collapses. And when either one falls, the Black Legion pours through and we lose the entire fortress. Then don't send troops, Steve said. Send me. Everyone stared at him. Creed looked like he was trying to determine if Steve had taken a head wound. Cross actually took a step forward as if to physically restrain him from such madness. You're injured, Covenant said flatly. Exhausted. You just survived 7 minutes against the bringers of despair. You want to throw yourself into another battle immediately? I want to do what I've always done, stand up when others can't. Steve picked up his shield, feeling its familiar weight settle into his grip. Your soldiers are dying because they don't have enough support. Because every decision is a choice between bad and worse. But if I can buy Yarrick time, hold one position long enough for reinforcements to arrive, then maybe we save that sector. Maybe we turn this around. You can't win this war alone, Creed said. No one can. I'm not trying to win it alone, sir. I'm trying to prove it can be won. That good people are worth the risk, worth the sacrifice. Steve met the Lord Castellan's gaze. You said earlier that hope is heresy in the 41st millennium. Maybe it's time someone reminded this galaxy that hope is how you survive impossible odds. Creed studied him for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled. A real smile, not the grim battle mask he usually wore. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. Possibly both. He turned to Cross. Brother Captain, I'm assigning you to accompany Captain Rogers to the Northern Front. Keep him alive. Learn from him. And if he's as dangerous to Imperial stability as Covenant fears— He paused. At least he'll die a hero. Cross nodded once. It will be done, Lord Castellan. Covenant looked like she wanted to protest, then thought better of it. Very well, but I'm sending my acolyte as well. Someone needs to document this for the Inquisition. And if Captain Rogers proves to be a heretic— Her hand touched her bolt pistol meaningfully. Steve nodded acceptance. He was too tired to argue, too focused on the next fight. Somewhere north of here, soldiers were dying. Lord Commissar Yarrick, whoever that was, needed help. And Steve Rogers had spent his entire life running toward the sound of gunfire. When do we leave? He asked. 30 minutes, Creed said. Time enough to get you basic medical attention and a meal. Cross will brief you on demon engines during transit. He extended his hand once more. Emperor's speed, Captain, and if you do somehow survive this madness, we need to have a very serious conversation about what you are and what your presence means for this war. As Steve shook his hand, he caught sight of Torin Vask in the crowd. The young guardsman stood at attention, eyes shining with that dangerous hope. Around him, other soldiers watched, waiting, believing for the first time in their brutal lives that maybe one person could change everything. Steve had planted seeds of rebellion without meaning to. Now he was about to water them with action. The Imperium was right to fear him, because Steve Rogers was about to show an entire galaxy that heroism didn't require the Emperor's blessing. Just courage, just determination, just the absolute certainty that people were worth protecting, no matter the cost. The Valkyrie transport screamed through Kadia's tortured sky at maximum velocity, its engines howling against wind that carried ash and the screams of dying psychers. Steve sat strapped into a crash harness, Brother Captain Cross beside him taking up the space of 3 normal humans, Covenant's acolyte silent in the corner like a living weapon waiting for deployment orders. "Demon engines," Cross said over the Vox link, his voice cutting through the engine noise, "are unlike anything you've faced. They're not machines in the traditional sense. They're prisons, metal shells that contain bound demons, twisted mockeries of the machine god's creations. They feel pain, they feel hate, and they want to break free and devour everything organic they encounter." Steve listened, cataloging information the way he'd cataloged tactical briefs before D-Day. Weaknesses? They're bindings, the ritual components that keep the demon imprisoned within the hull, but reaching them requires you get past armor that can shrug off lascannon fire, and weapons that will disintegrate you if they connect. Cross pulled up a hololithic display showing several demon engine variants. Defilers, spider-like, 8 legs, battle cannon mounted on their carapace. Mauler fiends, quadrupedal, designed for close combat, can tear apart a Lehman Russ tank in seconds. And Helldrakes. He paused. Pray we don't encounter Helldrakes. What are Helldrakes? Flying demon engines, dragons made of metal and malice. They strafe positions with warp fire that burns souls as well as bodies. Our anti-air batteries can hurt them, but rarely kill them. If you see one, find cover and stay in cover until it passes. Steve studied the images, his tactical mind working the problem. How does Yarrick usually fight them? Lord Commissar Yarrick fights them with fury and faith. He's killed orcs by the millions, survived having his arm torn off, and replaced it with his enemy's power claw. He's a legend made flesh, the one man the orcs themselves fear. Cross met Steve's gaze. But even legends die, Captain Rogers. And even Yarrick cannot hold against 3 demon engines and 2 Black Legion support companies without adequate reinforcement. The Valkyrie banked hard, and through the viewport Steve saw the northern front. It was hell made manifest, trenches that stretched for kilometers, packed with guardsmen firing lasguns in endless volleys against an advancing tide of chaos. Demon engines towered over the battlefield exactly as Cross had described, nightmarish fusions of metal and malevolent will. And everywhere the dead. Bodies stacked so high in places they formed new terrain features. "Landing zone hot," the pilot shouted. "Taking heavy fire. Prepare for combat insertion." The Valkyrie shuddered as something struck its hull. Alarms screamed. The acolyte moved to the exit hatch, perfectly calm, checking the sniper rifle with mechanical precision. Cross mag-locked his bolter and drew his power sword, the blade igniting with crackling blue energy. Steve tightened his grip on his shield. His ribs still ached from the fight with the bringers of despair. His knee protested every movement. The super soldier serum was working overtime to keep him combat effective. But he was running on fumes and sheer determination. Just like Brooklyn. Just like the war. Just like every fight he'd ever been in that mattered. 30 seconds to drop, the pilot called. "Emperor, protect you because I sure as hell can't." The Valkyrie's rear hatch blew open, and Steve got his first real look at the Northern Front's apocalypse. A defiler, 50 tons of demon-possessed metal spider, was tearing through a guardsman position, its battle cannon firing point-blank into trenches, while its power scourge crushed soldiers like insects. Behind it, Black Legion Chaos Space Marines advanced in disciplined formation, bolters chattering, cutting down fleeing guardsmen with methodical efficiency. And in the center of the carnage, one man stood alone. Lord Commissar Sebastian Yarrick was everything the stories promised. Ancient beyond measure, his face a roadmap of scars, one eye replaced with a glowing augmetic that resembled an orc's glare. His right arm was indeed an orc power claw, a massive hydraulic claw that crackled with energy. He wore a black greatcoat and peaked cap, and he was laughing as he fired his storm bolter into the defiler's joints. "Stand, you doss!" Yarrick roared at the guardsmen around him. "The Emperor watches. Death before dishonor. Glory before life. Now fire!" A ragged volley of lasgun fire erupted from the trenches. It did nothing to the defiler, but it didn't matter. Yarrick's presence, his absolute refusal to retreat, anchored the line. The guardsmen stayed because their commissar stayed, and to run would mean execution and eternal shame. "Drop, drop, drop!" the pilot screamed. Cross jumped first, his power armor absorbing the 20-foot fall effortlessly. The acolyte followed, deploying some kind of grappling system that arrested the fall silently. Steve went last, shield raised, hitting the ground hard and rolling to absorb the impact despite his injured knee. They'd landed 50 meters behind Yarrick's position. The defiler had just crushed a heavy weapons team and was turning toward the commissar, its demon-possessed consciousness recognizing the greatest threat. The battle cannon swiveled, tracking Yarrick with malevolent intelligence. "Captain Rogers," Cross pointed. "That cannon will vaporize everything within 20 meters. We need to—" Steve was already running. His knee screamed protest. His ribs sent lightning bolts of agony through his chest. Every instinct screamed that charging a 50-ton Damon engine was suicide. But Steve Rogers had never been good at listening to the sensible voice in his head. He covered the distance in seconds, super soldier speed carrying him across broken ground and through lass fire that scorched the air around him. The defiler's cannon finished tracking, energy building in its barrel, demon malice focused on erasing Yarrick from existence. Steve threw his shield. The vibranium disc struck the cannon barrel just as it fired. The combination of absorbed kinetic energy from the daemon's own blast and the shield's impossible properties created a resonance that cracked the barrel's containment field. The shot went wild, carving a furrow in the ground 50 meters off target. The defiler shrieked, actually shrieked, a sound that was metal tearing and damned souls screaming simultaneously. Its multiple eyes swiveled to focus on Steve. It recognized him instantly. The shield bearer. The anathema. The thing that shouldn't exist. "Well," Yarrick bellowed, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "Reinforcements arrive, about damn time." He looked at Steve, taking in the torn uniform, the blood, the shield that was spinning back toward its owner. "You must be the relic Creed voxed me about. The man who fought the bringers of despair and lived." "Captain Steve Rogers," Steve called back, catching his shield. "Pleasure to meet you, sir. You need a hand with your demon problem." Yarrick's laugh was like artillery fire. "A hand? Boy, I need an army. But if Creed sent you, maybe you're worth 20 divisions by yourself." He fired his storm bolter at approaching Chaos Marines, forcing them to take cover. "The Defiler first. Its pilot is in the central housing, armored, warded, protected by 12 layers of blasphemous ritual. But there's a maintenance hatch on the rear left leg joint. Hit it hard enough, you might disrupt the binding." Steve processed that in the half-second before the Defiler charged. 8 mechanical legs scrabbled across broken ground with horrifying speed. Its power scourge, a whip of crackling energy and demon-forged metal, lashed out, carving through rock-crete and flesh with equal ease. Steve dodged, barely. The scourge missed him by inches, close enough that he felt reality warp around it. Behind him, 2 guardsmen weren't fast enough. They died instantly, their bodies aging 100 years in a second, flesh sloughing off bones that turned to dust. "Brother Captain," Steve shouted, "I need covering fire on those Chaos Marines. Keep them off Yarrick's position." "Understood." Cross's bolter opened up. Mass reactive rounds finding targets with transhuman precision. The Space Marine moved like a force of nature, his armor absorbing hits that would have killed lesser warriors, his blade cutting down a Chaos cultist who'd gotten too close. The Acolyte had found a firing position on a collapsed building. The sniper rifle spoke once, just once, and a Chaos Marine's head exploded in a spray of corrupted blood. The shot was impossible. 500 meters, target moving, wind gusting erratically. But the Acolyte's augmetics didn't care about impossible. Steve circled the Diffur, looking for the maintenance hatch Yarrick had mentioned. The demon engine tracked him, its multiple weapons trying to draw a bead on a target, moving too fast and too unpredictably. It was used to fighting tanks and fortifications. Not a single man who fought like water flowing around obstacles. There, rear left leg joint. A panel marked with warnings in languages Steve couldn't read but understood instinctively. Danger, warp, containment, authorized personnel only. The problem was getting to it. The Defiler's legs were in constant motion, and each one was thick as a tank's turret. If Steve got caught underneath when it shifted weight, he'd be crushed instantly. He needed a distraction, needed the demon focused elsewhere for just 5 seconds. "Yarrick," Steve shouted, "can you make it angry?" The ancient commissar's augmetic eye glowed brighter. "Can I make a demon engine angry? Boy, watch a master work." He holstered his stormbolter, raised his power claw, and bellowed in a voice that carried across the entire battlefield. "Damon, I am Yarrick. I have killed 10 million greenskins. I have executed 10,000 cowards. I have stood against the darkness for 100 years, and I have never retreated. Come face me, you pissant mockery of the machine god. Learn why even demons know my name." The Defiler's entire attention swiveled to Yarrick. The demon inside the machine recognized that name, recognized that presence. Sebastian Yarrick was a legend in the Imperium, but also in the Warp. His sheer refusal to die, his absolute certainty in humanity's right to exist, had made him something the forces of chaos genuinely feared. The demon engine charged Yarrick, all 50 tons of malevolent metal focused on crushing the one human who'd dared mock it. Steve moved. He sprinted underneath the Defiler's advancing legs, shield raised to deflect debris. His super soldier physiology pushed to its absolute limit. The maintenance hatch loomed above him, locked with warp-infused seals. No time for finesse, no time for careful technique. Steve jumped, shield first, striking the hatch with every ounce of strength the super soldier serum could provide. The impact rang like a bell. The warp seals shattered, unable to withstand kinetic energy that refused to behave according to their physics. The hatch tore free, exposing the demon engine's core. And Steve saw the pilot. It wasn't a pilot. Not anymore. It had been human once, maybe. Now it was fused with the machine, flesh melted into metal, nerves wired directly into the demon's nervous system. Its eyes were gone, replaced with optical inputs that wept blood. Its mouth was frozen in a perpetual scream. For just a moment, Steve hesitated. Because this thing had been a person, someone who'd been corrupted, transformed, trapped in eternal agony to power this war machine. That moment of hesitation almost killed him. The Defiler felt the breach, the demon inside howling in pain and rage. It reared up, trying to throw Steve off, its legs scrabbling wildly. But Steve Rogers had hesitated in the face of suffering before, with Bucky, with the Winter Soldier, with every friend the world had tried to turn into a weapon. And he'd learned that sometimes mercy meant ending suffering, not prolonging it. He drove his shield into the pilot's fusion chamber. Vibranium met demon-infused circuitry, and the incompatible physics created a cascade failure. The binding rituals collapsed. The demon, suddenly free of its prison, tried to manifest fully, but without the engine's structure, it couldn't maintain coherence in real space. It dissolved, screaming, dragged back into the warp by forces beyond Steve's comprehension. The Defiler collapsed, 50 tons of dead metal crashing to the ground. Steve rolled clear, coming up bloody and bruised but alive. Around him, the battlefield had gone silent. Guardsmen stared. Chaos Marines paused their advance. Even Yarrick looked genuinely surprised. "By the throne," the Commissar breathed. "You killed a demon engine with a shield." "Disrupted the binding," Steve corrected, limping over. His knee was definitely damaged now. "There's a difference. The demon's back in the warp. The machine's just scrap metal." "There's still 2 more," Cross called, his bolter clicking empty. He drew his power sword and prepared for melee. "And the Black Legion is regrouping for another push." "We bought time, but—" The Vox crackled. Creed's voice emerged, distorted by distance and interference. "All units, Northern Front. Reinforcements inbound. 2 tank companies, 3 regiments, and whatever aerial support we could scrape together. Hold your positions. Hold for 10 minutes. Can you hold for 10? Yarrick looked at Steve, at Cross, at the acolyte who'd moved to a new firing position and was already lining up another impossible shot. At the guardsmen in the trenches, who'd seen one man kill a demon engine and were starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, this battle could be won. "Captain Rogers," Yarrick said, reloading his stormbolter with practiced efficiency. "Can you do that again? 2 more times." Steve tested his knee. It held, barely, looked at his shield, dented now but still functional. Felt the super soldier serum working overtime to keep him upright and combat effective. He thought about Torin Vask's face when he'd said, "You matter." Thought about the dead children he'd seen on the march to the Basilica. Thought about every person in this galaxy who'd been taught that their lives were meaningless, that survival required becoming monsters, that hope was heresy. "I can do this all day," Steve said, and he meant it. The second demon engine was a Mauler fiend, and it fought nothing like the Defiler. Where the Defiler had been a siege platform, slow, methodical, designed to break fortifications, the Mauler fiend was pure predatory aggression. It bounded across the battlefield on 4 hydraulic legs, each step covering 10 meters, its magma cutters superheating the air until Steve's lungs burned, just breathing near it. The demon bound inside this engine didn't hate, it hungered. "It'll try to close distance," Cross shouted, his power sword carving through a chaos cultist. "They're designed to rip apart vehicles in melee. Don't let it get within." The Mauler fiend lunged, covering 50 meters in 2 seconds. Steve rolled left, felt the magma cutter slice through the space he'd occupied, watched Rockcrete turn to molten slag in an instant. The heat was overwhelming. His torn uniform smoked. The Cadian cloth Tauren had given him began to char. He couldn't fight this thing the same way. The Defiler had been predictable, methodical. This demon engine was fast, and its close combat design meant there was no safe distance. Every moment he spent near it was a moment closer to being vaporized. "Yarrick," Steve called. "I need to slow it down." "Any ideas?" The ancient commissar was already moving, his power claw crackling as he actually charged, this 100-year-old man running toward a 4-ton murder machine like he was 20 years old and invincible. "Magma cutters run on thermal plasma, overload the cooling system. The whole thing goes critical." "How do I overload a cooling system I can't see?" "You're a clever boy. Figure it out." Yarrick slammed his power claw into the Mauler fiend's rear leg joint. Ceramite cracked. Hydraulic fluid sprayed. The demon engine shrieked and spun, magma cutter sweeping in an arc that would have bisected the commissar if he hadn't dropped flat at the last second. Steve used the distraction to circle wide, looking for weaknesses. The Mauler fiend's hull was sleeker than the Defiler's, more aerodynamic, fewer obvious access points. But every machine needed to cool itself, and thermal plasma generated heat that had to go somewhere. There, exhaust vents running along the spine, glowing cherry red with waste heat. They were high up on the creature's back, protected by overlapping armor plates. To reach them, Steve would need to get on top of a demon engine specifically designed to kill anything that came close. He'd done stupider things. Not many, but a few. The Mauler fiend charged Yarrick again. The commissar fired his stormbolter, the mass-reactive rounds sparking off armor, doing no real damage but keeping the demon's attention. It wanted him dead, wanted to rip apart this legend who'd humiliated Chaos forces for a century. Steve ran, not away, toward. He timed his approach to the Mauler fiend's stride, watching the rhythm of its hydraulic legs, calculating angles and momentum with the same tactical precision that had let him predict where falling debris would land in Manhattan. The demon engine's rear leg came down. Steve jumped, using the leg as a platform, his super soldier strength launching him upward. He grabbed the overlapping armor plates on its flank, pulled himself higher, shield mag locked to his back by pure grip strength. The Mauler fiend felt him, felt something on it, touching it, violating its hull. It went berserk. The demon inside howled, and the engine bucked like a mechanical bull, trying to throw Steve off. Its magma cutters swept backward, carving furrows in its own armor, trying to dislodge the pest on its back. Steve held on with fingers that dug into armor seams, his entire body screaming protest. His injured ribs felt like knives in his chest. His knee threatened to give out. But he was close, right next to the exhaust vents, close enough to feel the superheated air blistering his already damaged skin. He couldn't punch through armor, couldn't cut through ceramite. But vibranium had one property that made it unique. It absorbed kinetic energy, and thermal plasma was just energy in another form. Steve positioned his shield over the largest exhaust vent and pressed. Let the vibranium touch the superheated metal, felt the shield begin to absorb the thermal energy, create a seal that blocked the cooling system's output. The Mauler Fiend's internal temperature spiked immediately. Warning runes that Steve couldn't read but understood instinctively began flashing across its hull. The demon inside shrieked not in rage but in pain, feeling its mechanical prison begin to cook it alive. It did exactly what Steve had hoped. It panicked. The engine reared up, standing on its rear legs, exposing its underside, exposing the pilot chamber that was normally protected by 4 legs and tons of armor. Cross saw the opening and took it without hesitation. The Space Marine charged, power sword raised, and drove the blade directly into the pilot chamber. Blue energy met demon-infused circuitry. The binding failed catastrophically. The Mauler Fiend collapsed, its demon banished, its hull nothing but cooling metal. Steve fell with it, hitting the ground hard, rolling to absorb impact his body could barely handle anymore. He came up on his hands and knees, gasping, vision swimming. Blood dripped from his nose. His uniform was more scorch marks than fabric. The super soldier serum was keeping him conscious, but barely. 2 down, Crossye said, extending a ceramite gauntlet to help Steve up. 1 to go. Can you continue? Steve looked at the final demon engine. A second defiler, this one larger than the first. Its hull covered in screaming faces that wept blood. It had been hanging back, observing, learning from its siblings' mistakes. Now it advanced slowly, methodically, its battle cannon tracking targets with patient malevolence. I have to, Steve said simply. There's no one else. There's me, boy. Yarek clapped Steve on the shoulder with his power claw, the gesture somehow both encouraging and threatening. Between the 3 of us, 4, counting your silent friend, we've got enough fury to kill 1 more demon. The Emperor protects, but he also expects us to do the damn work ourselves. The Vox crackled. Reinforcements 3 minutes out, Creed's voice reported. Tank companies have visual on your position. Hold until they arrive. Do not, I repeat, do not engage the remaining demon engine without armor support. Yarek and Steve exchanged a look. 3 minutes is a long time, Yarek said. People could die in 3 minutes, Steve agreed. Lord Castellan will have us both shot for insubordination. I've been in trouble with commanding officers before. I can handle it. Yarek's laugh was pure joy. Emperor's throne, Creed sent me a kindred spirit, a man who understands that orders are suggestions and survival is negotiable. He raised his storm bolter. Listen up, you dogs. 1 more demon, 1 more charge, and then we hold this line until reinforcements arrive, or hell freezes over. Who stands with Yarek? The response was a ragged cheer from the trenches. Guardsmen who'd been ready to break, who'd watched their friends die by the hundreds, who'd been taught that survival was victory enough. They cheered. Because Yarek believed they could win. Because the shield-bearer had killed 2 demon engines. Because for the first time in this brutal war, they were fighting for something instead of just against inevitable death. The Defiler opened fire. Its battle cannon spoke with the voice of damned gods, shells the size of men screaming across the battlefield. One struck near Yarek's position, and the shock wave threw guardsmen like rag dolls. Another carved a crater where a heavy weapons team had been. The third was tracking Steve. The acolyte fired first, 1 shot perfectly placed, striking the cannon barrel mid-fire. The shell detonated prematurely, and the explosion blossomed inside the Defiler's own weapon housing. Not enough to destroy it, but enough to damage the firing mechanism. Buy them seconds. Seconds Steve used to charge. Again. because apparently he'd learned nothing from the previous two near-death experiences. His body was operating on nothing but determination and whatever fumes the super soldier serum could provide. His shield felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Every step sent lightning bolts of agony through his knee. But there were guardsmen dying. Children soldiers like Torin Vask, who'd been handed laser guns before they learned to read, who deserved better than this galaxy had given them. The Defiler saw him coming. Its power scourge lashed out, that reality-warping whip that aged flesh and shattered souls. Steve raised his shield, and vibranium met demon-forged metal in a collision that sent shockwaves across the battlefield. The shield held. It always held. Howard Stark's last gift, forged from a metal that defied physics, had withstood alien weapons and infinity stones, and now demon-touched corruption. It held. But Steve couldn't. The impact drove him to his knees, ribs finally giving up the ghost and cracking fully. Blood filled his mouth. His vision grayed at the edges. The super soldier serum could only do so much, and he'd pushed past its limits hours ago. The Defiler loomed over him, 8 legs surrounding him in a cage of corrupted metal. Its demon consciousness recognized him now. The shield bearer. The anathema. The thing that had killed its siblings. It would take its time, would make this hurt. Captain Rogers! Cross was fighting toward him, but 3 Black Legion Marines had cut him off. The Space Marine was buying time Steve didn't have. The power scourge raised for a killing blow. Then Yarrick was there. The ancient commissar moved with speed that defied his age. His power claw slamming into the Defiler's forward leg with such force that hydraulics ruptured and the engines staggered. His augmetic eye blazed like a sun, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 100 years of absolute conviction. "You do not touch him. This man represents something your dark gods cannot comprehend. He is hope incarnate. He is humanity's refusal to kneel, and I will be damned to the warp itself before I let you kill him." The Defiler turned its attention to Yarrick. Mistake. The Commissar had been fighting daemons, and worse, for longer than most people lived. He knew every trick, every tactic, every way to exploit a moment's distraction. "Steve!" Yarrick roared, not Captain Rogers or Shield-Bearer, but his name, personal and human. "The maintenance hatch, same place as before." "I'll keep it busy. You finish it." Steve forced himself up. His body screamed. His ribs were definitely broken. His knee was barely functional. But Yarrick was buying him time with his life, and Steve Rogers had never been able to let that kind of sacrifice go unanswered. He circled wide, using the Defiler's focus on Yarrick, moved like a ghost through smoke and debris, every step agony, every breath a battle, found the maintenance hatch exactly where it should be. This time he didn't hesitate, didn't think about the human who'd been fused with the machine, just drove his shield into the access panel with everything he had left. The hatch tore free. The binding shattered. The demon screamed as it was ripped from real space, dragged back to the warp. The Defiler collapsed, becoming nothing but metal and silence. Steve collapsed with it, consciousness fading. He heard Yarrick's voice, distant and echoing. 3 daemon engines. The madman killed 3 daemon engines. Hold the line. Reinforcements incoming. Hold, hold. The last thing Steve saw before darkness took him was Torin Vask's red cloth, still clutched in his hand, somehow unburned despite everything. Then nothing. Just the black and the distant sound of artillery and the knowledge that he'd bought them time. It would have to be enough. Steve woke to white light and the smell of disinfectant mixed with that ever-present incense. His body felt like it had been hit by a truck, then backed over for good measure. Every breath was shallow and controlled, his ribs bound so tightly he could barely expand his chest. His knee was immobilized in some kind of brace that hummed with a frequency he couldn't identify. "Awake then," Covenant's voice, clinical and assessing. "Your physiology is remarkable. 3 broken ribs, compound fracture in your left tibia, muscle tears across 40% of your body, severe dehydration, and second-degree burns covering your torso. You should be dead, or at least unconscious for weeks." Steve turned his head carefully. The Inquisitor sat beside the medical cot, her augmetic eyes dim in the low light. They were in some kind of field hospital. He could hear the sounds of wounded soldiers, the mechanized hum of medicized servitors, the endless vox traffic of a war that never stopped. "How long?" His voice was rough, throat raw from smoke inhalation. 18 hours. Lord Castellan Creed held a command meeting 6 hours ago. I convinced him not to execute you for disobeying direct orders, though it was a near thing. She leaned forward. "You killed 3 demon engines in one engagement. Yarrick calls it the most extraordinary display of individual heroism he's witnessed in 100 years of warfare. The Guardsmen are calling you the First Avenger, some linguistic artifact from your pre-unification vocabulary that survived in the data stacks. They're saying you were sent by the Emperor himself to save Cadia." Steve tried to sit up, failed, settled for remaining flat. "I'm not a saint, and I wasn't sent by anyone. I'm just a soldier doing his job." "That's precisely what makes you dangerous." Covenant stood, pacing. "A saint can be controlled, directed. They're miracles attributed to the Emperor's will. But you," she gestured at him, "you resist chaos corruption without faith. You inspire soldiers without commissariat approval. You perform miracles through skill and determination, not divine intervention. Every person who witnesses you begins questioning whether they need the imperial cult, whether the Emperor's protection is absolute, whether individual choice matters more than ordained hierarchy." "Good," Steve said flatly. "Maybe they should question it. I've seen what your Imperium does, executes its own soldiers for retreating, breeds people as ammunition, teaches children to kill before they can read. If people are questioning whether that's necessary, then maybe there's hope for this galaxy after all." Covenant's hand moved to her bolt pistol, not drawing it, just touching it, a reminder of authority and consequence. "Hope outside Imperial control is heresy, Captain Rogers. Hope without faith is corruption waiting to manifest. The Imperium has survived 10,000 years by eliminating exactly the kind of individualistic thinking you represent. And how's that working out?" Steve met her augmetic gaze without flinching. "Because from where I'm sitting, your Imperium is losing. Slowly, inevitably, drowning in endless war because it's too rigid to adapt, too scared to let people be anything but obedient tools." "We survive," Covenant said coldly. "That is victory enough." "Survival isn't living, it's just not dying yet. People deserve better. People deserve what they can defend. Nothing more, nothing less." She turned toward the exit, then paused. "Lord Castellan Creed wants to see you when you're mobile. So does Lord Commissar Yarrick. And Brother Captain Cross has requested permission to remain assigned to your detail. He says he's learning more about combat effectiveness from observing you than from 3 decades of Codex Astartes study." Her tone suggested she found this development personally offensive. "You have become a strategic asset, Captain Rogers. The Imperium doesn't discard strategic assets. It deploys them until they break." She left. Steve lay in the medical cot, staring at the ceiling, processing everything. 18 hours. He'd been unconscious for 18 hours while the war ground on. How many had died in that time? How many soldiers like Torin, fighting because they had no choice, dying because the machinery of war demanded constant blood sacrifice. "You're awake. Good." Yarek's voice preceded him, that bass growl unmistakable. The ancient commissar entered, his greatcoat still scorched from battle, his power claw clicking softly as servos adjusted. "Your Medici servitor says you'll be mobile in 48 hours. Your enhanced physiology is accelerating healing beyond imperial norms. Fascinating. I'd ask how it works, but tech priests get touchy about unsanctioned biological augmentation." "Super soldier serum," Steve said. "Developed on my world during a global war. Enhanced strength, speed, healing, sorry. Made me into something that could fight enemies normal soldiers couldn't handle. And here you are, 70-plus millennia later, still fighting enemies normal soldiers can't handle." Yarek sat down heavily, and for the first time Steve saw the weariness beneath the legend. This man had fought for 100 years, never stopped, never rested, kept going because stopping meant death for everyone who depended on him. "I've killed billions, Captain Rogers, orcs mostly, but chaos forces, traitor Imperials, Xenos of every variety. I've stood on 1,000 worlds and watched them die. I've executed men for cowardice and led charges I knew would fail, but had to be made anyway." He looked at his power claw, that trophy taken from an orc war boss. "And in all those years, all those battles, I've never seen anything like what you did. 3 Daemon engines, with a shield and determination. I had help, you, Cross, the Acolyte. I couldn't have done it alone. But you led, inspired, made us believe it was possible." Yarek's augmetic eye focused on Steve with uncomfortable intensity. "The guardsmen are talking, Captain. They're saying if one man can kill demon engines without the Emperor's blessing, maybe they're stronger than they've been taught. Maybe faith isn't the only weapon against chaos. Maybe," he paused, "maybe individual worth matters." "It does matter. They matter. Every single one of them. That belief will get you killed, or worse." Yarek leaned back. "Covenant's right to be concerned. You're a virus in the Imperium's theological immune system. Every soldier who sees you, who hears about you, starts questioning the doctrines that keep our society functioning. And when enough people question," he made a gesture suggesting catastrophic collapse, "the Imperium survives because everyone knows their place, knows they're expendable but necessary. You make them feel valuable. That's revolutionary thinking. And revolutions in the Imperium are drowned in blood." Steve processed that. "So what are you saying? That I should stop? Let people keep thinking they're worthless ammunition?" "I'm saying you need to be careful, strategic. If you burn too bright too fast, the Imperium will extinguish you before your light can spread." Yarek stood, joints creaking. "But if you burn at the right temperature, in the right places," a grim smile, "you might actually change something. Emperor knows this galaxy needs changing. Just don't let them martyrize you before you've made a difference that lasts." He was leaving when Steve called after him. "Yarek, why did you protect me? Against the Defiler? You could have let it kill me, solved Covenant's problem for her." The commissar paused in the doorway. "Because for 100 years, I've fought for survival, just survival, watching humanity grind itself down, generation after generation, maintaining the machine through blood sacrifice. And then you show up, refusing to quit, proving that one person can matter, and for the first time in a century, I thought—" He trailed off. "I thought maybe we're fighting for the wrong thing. Maybe we shouldn't fight to survive. Maybe we should fight to deserve survival. Figure out the difference, Captain Rogers. It might save us all." Then he was gone, leaving Steve alone with his thoughts and the distant sounds of war. 2 days later, Steve walked into Lord Castellan Creed's command center on a knee that still protested but functioned. The brace was off, the super soldier serum having done its work faster than any Imperial Medicae could explain. His ribs still ached, but he could breathe normally, move normally, fight if necessary. The command center was organized chaos, as always. Hololithic displays showed the broader strategic situation Cadia was holding, barely. The 13th Black Crusade was stalled, not defeated. Abaddon's forces were probing, testing, looking for the weakness that would crack the planet's defense. Creed stood at the central display, cigar unlit, studying troop movements with the focus of a man playing three-dimensional chess against an opponent who'd had 10,000 years to master the game. He looked up when Steve entered, and something in his expression had changed. Not quite respect, not quite fear, something in between. "Captain Rogers. Mobile, I see. Good. We have a situation." He manipulated the display, zooming in on a section of the Eastern Front. Kasser Myrak, secondary fortress, population 4 million, strategic value moderate. Abaddon's forces have bypassed it, left it isolated. No direct assault, just siege. They're starving it out, and I don't have the resources to break the siege. Steve studied the tactical situation. How long can they hold? 3 weeks, maybe 4. Then they start eating the dead. Creed said it without emotion, simple military calculus. I've written them off. Can't spare troops for a relief effort when the main thrust is here. Standard strategic triage. You're abandoning 4 million people? I'm preserving forces needed to defend positions that matter more. Creed met Steve's gaze. This is the Imperium, Captain. We make choices like this every day. 4 million versus 40 million. Easy mathematics. Not to those 4 million, it isn't. No. Creed's expression shifted, which is why I'm telling you. Because you're going to disobey orders, attempt a relief effort, probably get yourself killed, and I need to decide whether to stop you or let you try. He tapped his cigar, thinking. If you fail, you die. Covenant's problem is solved, and I lose one anomalous asset, Yaos. If you succeed, you save 4 million Imperial citizens, prove your value conclusively, and create a morale victory we desperately need. He lit his cigar finally. Either way, I can claim I tried to stop you and maintain plausible deniability. Steve felt a surge of respect for the old soldier. Creed was playing multiple games at once. Military strategy, political positioning, and something that might actually be conscience wrapped in pragmatic calculation. I'll need support, not troops. I know you can't spare them. But intelligence. Supply drop coordinates. Maybe that Valkyrie pilot who hates me but keeps me alive anyway. Done. Creed pulled up tactical data. Kasser Myrak's commander is General Castine, good officer, pragmatic, not prone to heroics. She's accepted their fate, but she'll hold to the last. If you can break the siege, she'll coordinate the defense. Brother Captain Cross has already volunteered to accompany you. Apparently, you're his new favorite study in combat efficiency, and Covenant's acolyte will provide overwatch. What about Covenant herself? She's conflicted. You're everything she's trained to eliminate, but you're also proving effective against chaos forces. She's requested permission to accompany you, to observe, to decide whether you're asset or threat. Creed smiled without humor. I approved it. Keep your enemies close, as the saying goes. Steve nodded slowly. When do we leave? 6 hours. Use the time to prepare. And Captain? Creed's tone shifted, becoming almost gentle. Those 4 million people, they don't know you're coming. Don't know help exists. They're preparing to die with whatever dignity they can muster as. If you can give them hope instead. He trailed off. That would be something worth seeing. As Steve left to prepare, he passed through corridors filled with soldiers preparing for their own battles. They saw him, the shield-bearer, the first Avenger, and their expressions shifted. Not worship, not awe, just possibility. The idea that maybe they weren't as powerless as they'd been taught. Torrin Vask found him in the armory, checking equipment. The young guardsman looked different. Older, somehow, though only days had passed. Battle did that. Ages you fast or kills you young. "Sir," Torrin said formally. Then softer. "Steve, I heard you're going to Kasser Myrak. That's a suicide run. The siege is complete. Black Legion on all sides. No one expects them to survive. Then they need someone who'll try anyway." Steve checked his shield, running fingers over new dents from the demon engines. "I can't save everyone, Torrin. Can't be everywhere at once, but I can try to help where I can. That has to be enough. Can I come with you?" The words tumbled out fast, like Torrin was afraid he'd lose courage if he hesitated. "I'm not asking for special treatment. Just, you've shown me that one person can make a difference. I want to make a difference too. Want to fight for something instead of just existing until I die." Steve studied the young man, saw himself in him a little, that desperate need to matter, to stand up, to be something more than circumstance demanded. He wanted to say yes, wanted to bring Torrin, show him that courage was contagious, that heroism could be learned. But he'd also sent too many good people to their deaths, had watched friends fall because he'd led them into danger, and Torrin was barely 20, deserved a chance to live long enough to see if this galaxy could become something worth surviving in. "No," Steve said gently, "not this time. I need you here. Need someone I can trust to remember what we're fighting for if I don't come back. Can you do that? Can you hold on to the idea that people matter, even in a galaxy that tells them they don't?" Torrin's eyes were bright with emotion. "Yes, sir, I can do that." "Good man," Steve squeezed his shoulder. "Keep that red cloth safe for me. I'll want it back when I return." "You will return. You have to. You're Captain America." Steve smiled at that. His old identity somehow survived into this dark future. "Oh, I'm just Steve Rogers, but I promise I'm coming back. These people deserve someone who keeps fighting. I won't let them down." As he walked toward the Valkyrie Bay, shield across his back, body still healing but functional, Steve thought about what Yarrick had said, fighting to survive versus fighting to deserve survival. The Imperium had survived 10,000 years through cruelty and faith and endless sacrifice, but survival alone wasn't enough. Not for him, not for the people who looked at him and saw possibility, instead of just another authority figure demanding obedience. 4 million people were waiting to die at Kasser Myrak. They'd accepted their fate, made peace with extinction. Steve Rogers was about to remind them that fate was negotiable when someone refused to accept it. The 41st millennium had forgotten what hope looked like in all. Time to teach it again. Stay connected for Part 2. What if Captain America saved Warhammer 40k?